The villagers whispered long before dawn, their voices sharp as the wind that swept through the fields. "She's marrying the poor man," they said, shaking their heads, as if the very thought was a curse. And so, on that pale morning when young Emily's fate was sealed, the world around her seemed to fade. The laughter of her past, the comfort of her family home, the warmth of pride, all vanished, leaving only the sound of her own quiet heartbreak. Her father, crushed beneath the weight of debts he could no longer pay, had made a choice. To save himself, he had traded his daughter's happiness for a chance to breathe again. The man he gave her to, Kobe, was known as the poor man from the fields, a figure both pitied and mocked. His hands were rough, his clothes worn, his voice low and measured. To the village, he was no one. But what they didn't see, what no one could have imagined, was that Kobe's poverty was a mask, a test, a wall built to protect something far greater than gold. In a forgotten barn at the edge of his land lay his secret. Chests, buried under tarps and dust, filled with a fortune that could have bought half the valley. He guarded it in silence, not out of greed, but because he wanted to see who valued hearts over coins. When Emily was brought to him in tears, her fine dress stained with dust, he saw not a spoiled girl, but someone trapped, like him, in a world that judged worth by wealth. He took her hand gently, not to claim her, but to promise something unspoken, that one day she would see who he really was. The wedding itself was more funeral than celebration. The morning sun hung weak and uncertain above the dirty courtyard, lighting up crooked chairs and faces lined with gossip. No drums played, no laughter rang. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Emily walked slowly, each step heavy with shame, her eyes fixed on the ground as if she could hide from her own life. Her white dress, once bright, now gathered dust at the hem, and the silence around her pressed down like a weight. Kobe stood by the old village elder, Kojo, calm, grounded, his gaze soft but steady. When Emily reached him, he lowered his eyes, not daring to look directly at her. The crowd took his modesty for weakness, but Kojo, wise and watchful, saw differently. He saw humility, the kind that isn't learned from books or bought with fortune, but carved deep through loneliness and quiet endurance. The elder's voice cut through the thick air, steady and strong. "Marriage is not a burden," he said. "It is a seed. It grows only when both water it with patience and respect." His words carried across the yard like a prayer, but to Emily they sounded far away, like bells ringing from a place she could never reach. Around her, whispers buzzed like flies. Nia, her cousin, leaned close to another woman and murmured, "If it were me, I'd run. Marrying a poor man is the same as dying alive." The cruel words landed like arrows, sharp and true. Emily pretended not to hear, but the sting reached her eyes. Kobe, silent beside her, showed no anger. Only the faint tremor of his fingers betrayed that he, too, had felt the wound. When it was his turn to speak, Kobe lifted his head and said simply, "I promise to care even when the harvest fails. I promise to listen even when the world is screaming. And I promise never to forget that every tear also waters love." His voice wasn't grand, but something in its honesty silenced even the mockers. The crowd fell still. It was a vow that sounded like it had been lived before it was spoken. Emily hesitated, her lips dry, her heart filled with resentment. Then, catching her father's tired eyes from across the yard, she whispered a single word. "Yes." It came out like a thorn, small and painful, but it was enough. Kojo lifted his hands in blessing. "May those who came to mock learn compassion," he said, "and those who came to judge learn silence." A soft breeze stirred, lifting Emily's veil as if to wipe away her tears. And for a brief moment, it felt as though the air itself pitied her. After the vows, there was no music, no dance. The children ran off, the men left, the women lingered, whispering behind half-forced smiles. Emily went inside to change. The cracked mirror reflected a face she hardly knew. Pale, frightened, no longer belonging to the girl she had been. Outside, Kobe thanked every guest who had stayed, even those who once called him a beggar. When the last footsteps faded, he turned to her and said softly, "There's no shame in starting small. The shame is in treating others as if they are." Emily didn't reply. Her heart was too heavy, her pride too raw. But later, as the sun set and she saw him sitting quietly beneath the mango tree, his face calm and filled with peace, something inside her stirred. Confusion, perhaps, but also a question. How could someone humiliated by all still look so unbroken? That night, as she lay in bed, she heard her father's weary whisper through the walls. "She's safe now. Maytime teacher. The word safe echoed in her chest, strange and bitter. Safety felt like a cage, and freedom like something stolen away. When she finally drifted to sleep, the moonlight poured across the fields outside. The same fields that Kobe, the man they called poor, would one day turn into destiny. The path to their small home stretched long beneath that same moon. The air smelled of wet soil and wild grass. Crickets sang somewhere far away, and the steady rhythm of cowbells filled the silence. By the time they reached the cabin, the night was deep and silver. The house stood there, humble, uneven, built of clay and straw with a roof that sagged and windows too narrow to frame dreams. The wind slipped through the cracks, whispering softly, as if to remind them that even poor walls could hold warmth. Emily stopped at the threshold, frozen. This wasn't home. It was exile. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. Kobe opened the door, lit a small lantern, and said gently, "It's not much, but it's all I've managed to keep standing with my own hands." The golden light flickered, revealing the little they had: a crooked table, 2 chairs that didn't match, a rough bed, a clay stove still warm from the last meal. He handed her a plate of cassava and dried fish. "Eat," he said softly. "Tomorrow is work, and the land waits for no one." Emily nodded but couldn't swallow. Her heart was still chained to the world she'd lost. The scent of soap, of coffee in porcelain cups, of laughter in rooms too clean to remember struggle. The nights stretched long. She woke often to the rain tapping on the roof, half afraid it would cave in. Every morning before sunrise, Kobe left, hoe on shoulder, water bottle at his hip. And every evening, he returned covered in dust and quiet endurance. He never complained. When she cried, he didn't try to comfort her with words. He would simply leave a clean cloth on the bench and step outside. One day, seeing her crying into her hands, he paused and said, "Wealth that humiliates doesn't last beyond a sunrise." Then he went back to work. His words lingered long after he was gone, like seeds drifting through her heart, unsure if they would ever grow. Time passed slowly in that small home. Chickens clucked. Smoke curled from the clay stove. The rhythm of the days softened Emily's bitterness. She began to help, washing clothes by the river, staring at her reflection trembling in the muddy water. Sometimes she thought of her cousin Nia and wondered what they would say now if they saw her with cracked hands and dirty skirts. But there was something about Kobe's quiet, the peace that filled the house, that began to change her. He never shouted, never demanded, never treated her as lesser. Then one dawn, she woke to the sound of whistling. Kobe stood in the yard with a basket of fresh fruit and wild white flowers. He placed them on the table and said, "The beauty of life is that it keeps insisting, even when we give up on it." Emily touched the flowers, so simple, so plain, and something warm flickered inside her. It was small, but it was real, and as the weeks passed, the little house began to change too. Emily swept the dirt floors, hung bright cloths at the windows, cooked beans on the clay stove. Kobe came back from the fields with stories, laughter, and calloused hands. Sometimes they would sit together at the door and watch the sunset paint the sky red. In those moments, the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was a kind of peace that grew slowly, like a flower blooming when no one is watching. But not everything was light. At night, when the wind blew hard, Emily remembered her old life and felt a knot tighten in her chest. She missed what she once believed was happiness and feared becoming used to poverty. Even so, something inside her was starting to shift. She no longer looked at Kobe with disdain, but with curiosity. There was in him a quiet strength, a firmness that depended on nothing material. It was as if he knew a secret the world had yet to learn. The secret of living in peace, even when surrounded by lack. One late afternoon, as the sky filled with clouds, Kobe came close to her and said with serenity, "We learn more from simplicity than from luxury. Luxury distracts, but simplicity teaches." Emily stayed silent, looking at the ground. She didn't know what to say, but for the first time she felt there might be wisdom in this man. People called poor, and without realizing she breathed a little deeper. The air in the cabin no longer felt so heavy. The poverty remained, but her heart, though still bruised, was beginning to listen, and for the first time to understand the sound of silence. The sun rose slowly behind the hills, tinting the sky with a soft orange hue. It was always the same ritual. Kobe left before the rooster crowed, hoe on his shoulder and head held high. The birdsong accompanied his steady steps down the dirt road. Emily, still lying in bed, would hear the door closing and the distant sound of footsteps fading into the fields. At first, that silence weighed on her like punishment. She felt abandoned, isolated in a place where even time seemed tossed and still. But as the days passed, she began to realize that silence was Kobe's way of speaking to life. When he returned, his body bore the exhaustion plainly, arms marked by long hours under the sun, and still his smile came first. He leaned the hoe against the wall, washed his face in the aluminum basin, and asked in a calm voice, "How was your day, Emily?" She'd give a short answer, often just a nod, and he never pushed. He would prepare dinner with whatever they had: corn, potatoes, a piece of fish, and eat in silence, respecting the space she still didn't know how to fill. It was a strange coexistence, yet peaceful. Two worlds living under the same roof, trying to learn each other's language without words. Little by little, Emily began to observe. Kobe was not like the men she had known. He didn't drink, didn't complain about life, didn't speak ill of others. He worked with devotion, as if each seed planted in the earth was a prayer. There was something almost sacred in the way he treated the soil, kneeling, patient, like someone communing with something greater than himself. One day, as she watched him return from the fields, face covered in sweat and dust, she realized there was dignity in it, and that realization, subtle as it was, became the first thread of respect that grew between them. The afternoons were long, and Emily began to fill the time washing, sewing, tending to the plants around the cabin. Once Colby came home with wild fruits and small white flowers, he placed in a clay cup on the table. "The land is generous when wet read it with love," he said, and stepped out into the yard. Emily stared at the flowers for a while, unsure of what to feel. It wasn't the gift that moved her, but the gesture, a simple kindness, not meant to please, only to share. And in that moment, she understood that love doesn't arrive with promises. It reveals itself in silent acts. Sometimes at night, Kobe told stories. He spoke of his childhood in the highlands, of the father who taught him to work, and the mother who sang to chase away the fear of storms. Emily listened in silence, pretending not to care. But each story left a mark. She was beginning to discover something in him she'd never seen in a man, a strength that didn't come from wealth, but from peace. He didn't try to impress, didn't seek recognition. He seemed to live in service of what he believed to be right and good. And that quiet firmness began to awaken something in her she couldn't yet name. But not everything was tenderness. Some days, the weight of the past returned like a shadow. Emily remembered her friends from the city, the new clothes, the laughter at the dancers, and the comparison hurt. She looked at her hands dirty with earth and felt ashamed of herself. Sensing this, Kobe would simply say, "The earth dirties the hands, but cleanses the heart." She would turn away, hiding her emotion, and he would return to his work without another word. It was his way of teaching through gestures, not speeches. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, Emily saw Kobe helping a neighbor rebuild a chicken coop the wind had torn down. He spent the entire day there, expecting nothing in return. When he came back, he wore a tired smile and carried a sack of corn on his back. "He tried to pay me, but I told him friendship is worth more than coins," he said while cleaning his boots. It was that day Emily realized that maybe there was something grand hidden in the simplicity of that man. Something the world called poverty, but she was beginning to see as wisdom. That night before sleeping, she found herself watching Kobe light the lantern and gently blow on the flame, as if protecting a small life. The silence in the cabin no longer felt empty. It was a silence full of meaning, the sound of respect being born. Emily laid down and thought of his words, still echoing. Wealth that humiliates doesn't last more than a sunrise. And for the first time since the wedding, she fell asleep without crying. Time passed slowly, as it often does in villages, where each day seems to repeat the last. Emily and Kobe's life moved at a simple rhythm made of work, silence, and small routines. But outside the cabin, curious eyes never rested. The city girls' marriage to the man from the countryside was still the favorite topic in the town square. Among the women washing clothes at the river and at the doors of the little shops, the village tongues never slept. It only took a stumble from Emily or a gesture from Kobe to reignite the flames of malice. One afternoon, while Emily was washing clothes at the river, she heard two women whispering behind her. The beauty became a peasant's wife. Now she's learning the value of a hoe. The other laughed, shaking her skirt. She thinks she can turn mud into Apollos. The laughter echoed among the stones, wounding more than any slap. Emily gripped the fabric in her hands, trying to hold back tears. She didn't respond. She just lowered her head and let the water carry the words away. But inside, the shame burned like fire. That night, she came home in silence, avoiding Kobe's gaze, who, seeing her downcast, simply said, "Don't be saddened by what the wind says. It doesn't know where it comes from, nor where it's going." In the days that followed, the rumors grew louder. They said she planned to run away, that the marriage was unhappy, that Kobe was too weak to keep her. Others claimed he had bewitched her with old prayers. It was the kind of cruelty fed by envy. Kobe heard the gossip without reacting. When someone repeated the rumors to him, he would smile faintly and reply, "Those who speak of others reveal the weight they carry inside." This calmness unsettled even the most malicious ones who didn't know how to hurt someone who refused to be provoked. Emily, however, still felt wounded. The villagers' words pierced her mind like thorns, and every hidden laugh felt like a reminder of her humiliation. One day, while walking through the market, she heard the same neighbor who had mocked her wedding say loud enough for everyone to hear, "She wanted to be a lady, and ended up a water," and her face flushed, and for a moment she thought of answering. But the words caught in her throat. She ran home and cried until her body gave out. When Kobe arrived, he found her with swollen eyes, her face turned to the wall. He sat beside her and waited in silence. After a while, he said only, "The words of the wicked have no roots. They hit and bounce back. They only hurt if we give them a home." And he stepped outside, leaving the advice hanging in the air. The next day he came home earlier from the fields and brought a gift, a pair of handmade sandals. "I made them with leftover leather from the neighbor's ox. I thought of you." Emily held the sandals, surprised. She had never received something made with such care. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded and a faint smile appeared in her face. For the first time, she realized that Kobe's hands, though rough from the hoe, also knew how to create beauty. Weeks went by, and slowly the whispers in the village began to fade. Time always reveals what is true. People saw that despite the gossip, the couple remained united in silence, tending to what they had. One day, during a local celebration, Kobe offered part of his harvest to the community temple. He did it without announcement, without seeking praise. He simply left the sack of corn at the door and walked away. The same voices that once mocked him now began to quiet down. Genuine generosity speaks louder than any rumor. Emily watched everything in silence. Something inside her was changing. She was beginning to realize the true strength wasn't in responding to offense, but in refusing to be defined by it. Kobe didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And maybe that was why he was so free. One night, as the wind blew gently, she looked at him and softly asked, "How do you not get hurt by what they say?" Hesmeladin replied, "Because I've learned that God's voice speaks lower than people's tongues. But it's the only one that lasts." That answer was etched in Emily's heart. From then on, whenever she heard whispers in the distance, she simply took a deep breath and kept walking. She no longer needed to fight every word. Time had taught her that honor isn't defended with shouts, it's upheld with dignity. And though the village still talked, for the first time since the wedding, Emily felt that inside her there was silence. And the silence now was peace. Time flowed insolence like a slow river that never reveals where it's going. Emily and Kobe had been living together for nearly a year. The cabin's routine had become lighter. Laughter, though rare, had begun to visit the house. But the peace that seemed to be settling was broken on a gray afternoon, when a messenger arrived at the door with news from afar. Emily's father Quame was gravely ill. The words landed cold, like a stone falling into still water. Emily froze. For a moment, everything around her lost its color. Without saying a word, she sat on the wooden bench and clasped her hands in her lap. That same night, she decided to leave. She packed a small bag and told Kobe she would return to her parents' home. "I need to see him. He's my father," she said, trying to hide the anguish her voice betrayed. Kobe simply nodded. "A child's love is a living prayer. Go without fear. I'll wait. The journey was long, the road covered in dust. Emily walked for hours, her heart torn between gratitude and remorse. When she arrived, she found the old house silent, the furniture covered in dust, and her mother, Abena, sitting at the edge of the bed with swollen eyes. Kwame was thin, frail, his breath short. When he saw her, he tried to smile, but it melted into exhaustion. "Daughter, you came." Emily knelt beside him, held his hand, and felt the cold touch of regret run through her body. Inside, a memory act, the same father who had given her away in marriage to pay off a debt now needed her to stay alive. In the days that followed, she did what she could. She made soups, changed the cloths, whispered prayers at night, but the medicine was expensive, and her mother had nothing left to give. She decided to ask the wealthier relatives in the city for help. She went to her uncle's house, a man of wealth and pride. As soon as the door opened, she heard the cold tone. "Emily, I thought you had disappeared into the woods with that poor man." She explained the situation, told him of her father's illness, and asked for a loan. The uncle feigned concern, sighed, and replied, "You chose this path. We can't get involved." His words hurt more than any slap. She left with tearful eyes and an empty heart. She tried other doors, cousins, acquaintances, and always heard the same response. "I'm sorry." When she returned to the cabin, her body trembled with exhaustion and anger. She found Kobe sitting on the porch cleaning his stools. When he saw her, he stood up, wiped his face with a cloth, and said, "I already know. They sent you back with broken promises." Emily said nothing. He stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder, and added, "Don't cry for those who never learned compassion. Isolde the crops. The money will be enough for your father's treatment." Emily widened her eyes. "You sold everything, but what about us? What will we eat?" Kobe replied calmly. "The land always gives new fruit, but life once gone doesn't return. Your father needs hope more than I need corn." She tried to speak, but emotions stole her voice. It was the first time she truly saw the depth of his generosity. A man who had nothing and still knew how to give. In the days that followed, they prepared everything together. Kobe went with her to the village, delivered the money to the healer, and helped with the medicine. He stood quietly by the door while Emily prayed by the bedside. Her father, caught between life and death, opened his eyes and asked weakly, "Was it him who paid?" She nodded. Wayne took a deep breath and said, "Then the poor man I looked down on is the richest man I've ever met." The illness ran its course, and the old man gradually improved. When the danger had passed, Emily and Kobe returned home. The road seemed different, the same old ground, but now the weight on their shoulders had changed. The wind blew gently, as if trying to sweep the past away. When they arrived, Emily looked at the empty field where their crops once grew and felt a knot in her throat. "You gave up everything for me," she said. Kobe smiled. "Gave up? No, life gives back what is just. Sometimes it only wants to see if we still remember how to share." That night, Emily stayed awake for a long time, watching the man who slept beside her. For the first time, she saw beyond the poverty. She saw the character, the soul, the quiet strength. She realized there was more nobility in that mud cabin than in the grand houses where she had once been humiliated. And in the darkness, she understood. Some men are rich without gold, because their hearts are a treasure the world does not know how to measure. Life seemed to have resumed its course when a new dawn brought the unexpected. Emily woke to the muffled sound of footsteps outside. The moon was high, casting a pale glow over the yard. She peeked through the window and saw Kobe slipping out quietly, carrying a lantern and a small key hanging around his neck. Curiosity mixed with a strange sense of foreboding overtook her. She wrapped herself in ash shawl and barefoot followed him down the road that led to the fields. The cold dawn air stung her face and the still damp earth clung to her feet. Kobe walked with purpose like someone who knew the path well. Emily kept her distance, making no sound. After a few minutes, he stopped in front of the old abandoned barn, a weathered structure that time had nearly swallowed. Its walls were covered in moss, and the crooked roof let the moonlight seep through. Kobe stepped inside and Emily waited. The silence was heavy. Then suddenly she heard the click of a lock opening. She crept closer, slowly pushed the door open, and what she saw took her breath away. In the corner of the barn were 3 large wooden chests. Inside them, under the flickering light of the lantern, gleamed documents, old coins, jewelry, and medallions. The scene looked like something pulled from a dream. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding, unable to grasp what she was seeing. Kobe wasn't startled by her presence. He simply lifted his eyes and said with a calm voice, "You needed to know. The truth weighs less when it's shared." She stepped closer, still in disbelief. "What is all this, Kobe? Where did it come from?" He took a deep breath and answered, "My father owned these lands, all these farms that now belong to others. He lost everything out of pride, trying to prove to the world he was greater than God. When he died, I vowed I wouldn't make the same mistake. I kept what was left, but chose to live poor until I learned the value of humility. Emily said nothing. His words echoed inside her like thunder. Everything she thought she knew about this man was crumbling. Then why didn't you tell me? Why let me live like this, thinking we had nothing? Kobe looked her in the eyes, steady and unwavering, because someone who loves what you have will never love who you are. I had to know if your heart was bigger than your shame. She stepped back, her throat tightening. The tears came without warning, not from anger or fear, but a kind of emotion that blended shame and admiration. She remembered every time she had called him poor, every silent moment of contempt, and felt the weight of each one. Kobe closed the chest, locked it, and said, "Wealth without wisdom is a curse. Poverty that teaches us a blessing." They walked back together in silence. The return felt longer than the way there. The wind blew gently, but Emily's heart was heavy. When they reached the cabin, Kobe set the lantern on the table and sat down. "I didn't want to deceive you. I just wanted you to understand the value of simplicity before knowing the value of gold." Emily watched him. That man, so ordinary in appearance, held an entire world within his chest. In the days that followed, she spoke very little. She would watch him as he worked, trying to understand how someone could have so much, yet choose so little. In time, her restlessness gave way to respect. There was greatness in the way he treated life, as if money were just a passing guest. One afternoon, while preparing dinner, Emily broke the silence. "You could have had everything, Kobe. Why did you choose to live like this?" He smiled, his gaze lost in the horizon. "Because only when we lose what we have do we discover what's essential. The land teaches this every day. Those who sow with vanity reap emptiness. Those who sow with love reap peace." She stood still, listening to every word as if it were a prayer. She finally understood that the man the village had called a fool was wiser than all of them combined. And for the first time, she felt proud to call him her husband. His secret wasn't just the gold hidden in the barn. The real treasure was standing right in front of her. A man who had chosen poverty to learn how to be rich in soul. In the days following that night in the barn, the air inside the cabin felt different. Emily woke with the sun shining through the window and sensed that something inside her had changed, something she couldn't name. The image of the chests filled with gold and jewels came back to her mind constantly. But it wasn't the gleam of the metal that unsettled her. It was Kobe's silence in the face of so much hidden wealth. The serenity with which he lived, as if none of it existed, made her question everything she believed about worth, pride, and love. One morning, under a gray sky while he sharpened his hoe in the yard, Emily approached. She stood there for a moment, just watching. The sound of metal against stone blended with the distant song of birds. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Not even me?" Kobe stopped what he was doing, looked up and replied calmly, "Truths told before their time become burdens, not lessons." Emily lowered her eyes, holding back tears. "But you let me suffer," she said. He took a deep breath. "Suffering isn't punishment, Emily. It's a mirror. It was in your silence that I saw the size of my own faith." The response hung in the air. She wanted to reply, but couldn't. There was a dignity in his words that disarmed every defense. Kobe continued, "When you came here, your eyes held shame and longing for what you believed was happiness. I couldn't buy your respect. It had to be born on its own." Emily bit her lip. She felt ashamed of the harsh words she had said in the early months, of the times she'd called him poor, of the tears shed out of pride. She stepped closer and spoke in a near whisper. "And now, Kobe, what will you do with all of that?" He smiled faintly. "Nothing changes. The gold stays where it is." "Its time hasn't come yet." That phrase echoed within her. How could someone choose poverty when they had the power to live in abundance? That afternoon, while sweeping the dirt floor, Emily looked around and realized the cabin, with all its floors, had become a home. The cracks in the walls no longer seemed so ugly, and the wind coming through the gaps no longer felt like a threat. It was just the wind, free, honest, inevitable. For the first time, she felt like she belonged to that place, not trapped by it. That night, dinner was quiet but not heavy. They sat side by side, sharing the same plate. Kobe told an old story about a farmer who lost everything and found happiness by serving others. Emily listened closely. When he finished, she asked, "Do you believe people can change even after making so many mistakes?" He answered without hesitation, "Change is the harvest of those who saw repentance with sincerity." She smiled, and it was shy, but true. The ice between them had begun to melt. Days later, rumors about Kobe's fortune began to spread among the neighbors. No one knew where they came from. Perhaps some curious soul had followed the same path Emily did that night. Suddenly, the same people who had mocked them began appearing at their door, offering help, friendship, advice. Emily watched with suspicion. Kobe, however, welcomed them with the same calm smile. He offered coffee, asked about their families as if nothing had changed. When she commented, "They only came back out of interest," he replied, "Each person's heart is its own judge. Time handles justice better than we do." One afternoon, seeing him share his last sacks of corn with a hungry neighbor, Emily came closer and asked, "Don't you ever get tired of being good?" Kobe looked up at the sky and said, "Kindness is the only wealth that never gets lost when we're gone." A lump formed in her throat. For the first time, she understood that the man beside her wasn't hiding just a material treasure. He held a treasure of soul, one that could never fit inside a chest. That night she lay down early but couldn't sleep. She thought about everything they had lived through. The forced marriage, the shame, the villagers' words, the secret revealed, and suddenly she realized there was no more bitterness in her chest. There was gratitude and a quiet certainty that true gold doesn't shine in the daylight. It glows in the heart of those who choose truth. Even when they could choose appearance before falling asleep, she looked at Kobe and thought peacefully. He didn't teach me how to be rich. He taught me how to be whole. It didn't take long for the news to spread through the village like fire through dry straw. They said the man from the fields, the one everyone used to call poor, was hiding a lost fortune. Some claimed he had found gold. Others swore he was the heir to an old family. The truth, which only Kobe and Emily knew, was far deeper. But the village never had much patience for the truth. It preferred rumor, exaggeration, and spectacle. And so, one by one, the same faces that had once turned away began to reappear. The neighbors who used to laugh at Emily's patched dress now come to the door with gifts and compliments. "You've always been a woman of faith," they said, trying to mask their embarrassment. The men who had called Kobe a fool now shook his hand with forced enthusiasm, praising his wisdom. The old village chief, who had once refused him a favor, now spoke of opening doors to future partnerships. Emily watched it all in silence, torn between the urge to laugh and the urge to cry. Kobe, however, remained serene. He welcomed each visitor with the same calm as always, offered coffee, and listened without interrupting. One morning, one of Emily's old friends near showed up at the door, adorned with new necklaces and strong perfume. She wore the smile of someone with ulterior motives. "My dear Emily," she said, "I always knew you were destined for greatness. That husband of yours is a lucky man." Emily looked at her for a moment, remembering the cruel words she'd heard on her wedding day. Inside her heart burned, but her voice came out calm. "Not luck, Anne. He's the man who taught me to see what gold can't show." The visitor, taken aback, laughed awkwardly and quickly changed the subject. In the following days, the foot traffic to the cabin increased. Neighbors, distant relatives, forgotten acquaintances all started to appear. Some brought gifts, others came seeking favors. Kobe refused no one, but he made no promises either. When Emily asked if he didn't feel betrayed, he replied, "Other people's repentance is land you don't walk on barefoot. You watch from a distance until you see if the fruit is real." She understood what he meant. It was his way of saying that time reveals what intentions hide. One afternoon, Emily's father, still recovering from his illness, came to visit. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, eyes full of remorse. When he arrived, he asked to speak with Kobe alone. They sat beneath the mango tree, and for a while, nothing could be heard but the rustling of the leaves. Then the old man spoke. "I judged you by what I saw, and what I saw was little. Forgive me, son." Kobe stood, placed a hand on his father-in-law's shoulder, and answered, "The eyes of pride are the last to see. But once they do, they heal." Wami lowered his head and wept in silence. It was the first true embrace between the two men. Gradually, the respect that had once been denied to them began to bloom. The same people who had mocked them now came seeking advice, help, or words of comfort. Emily, still cautious, watched her husband welcome them all without bitterness. "Why do you do it?" she asked him one day. He replied, "Because forgiveness is the only inheritance life allows me to give without growing poorer." The crops began to flourish again. The barn was rebuilt, and the once scorned cabin became a gathering place. At night, children came to hear stories, and elders sought a bit of peace by the fire. Kobe told simple parables full of wisdom. He'd say that wealth, when it arrives before humility rots the heart. That money is like a river. It's meant to nourish the land, not drown in it. One evening after one of these talks, Emily sat watching the fire crackle and thought about all they'd been through. She remembered the shame of the wedding, the laughter at the river, the nights she cried alone. Now the same people who once looked down on her spoke her name with respect. But what moved her most was seeing that Koba had not changed. Neither scorn had diminished him, nor admiration inflated him. He was the same, steady, fair whole. Before bed, Emily asked if he truly believed people could change. Kobe answered, "Some do, others pretend. But time doesn't pretend. It shows everything in the end." Then he added, "Let time teach the value of repentance." The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the cabin, Emily stepped outside and looked at the field stretching before her. The breeze passed gently, carrying the sweet scent of renewal. For the first time, she felt that the past was finally at peace. Because true forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's learning to look back without pain. The months that followed brought a different kind of calm. It wasn't the heavy silence of those first nights in the cabin, but a peace full of meaning, like a river that finds its true course after so many bends. Emily, who once felt imprisoned by poverty, now walked with lightness. The woman who had cried for the past was beginning to discover herself in the present. The fields which once felt like punishment had become a part of her. She had learned the rhythm of the land, the timing of the harvest, the value of rest. She discovered that the sound of leaves rustling in the wind is also a kind of prayer. Kobe remained the same serene gaze, the same patience in every gesture. But now Emily could see beyond appearances. She saw the man within. She saw the quiet strength that held the home together, the heart that had never hardened, even in the face of humiliation. And what began as gratitude turned into respect. Respect over time became tenderness, and tenderness inevitably became love. A mature love, quiet, without promises, but full of truth. Every morning they worked side by side. Kobe taught her the secret of the seeds. Each has its own time. Emily, some sprout fast, others sleep until the rain comes, but all, if well cared for, will bloom. And she understood he wasn't only speaking about the crops, but about life. In the afternoons they would sit beneath the mango tree, Emily sewing colorful cloths, Kobe repairing tools. Sometimes they exchanged no words at all, and yet the silence between them felt like company, not distance. One day, the oldest neighbor, Kojoa, came by with a basket of corn. "I came to repay what you gave me when my chicken coop collapsed." Emily received her with a smile and realized for the first time that the village's respect was no longer fake. Now they came not out of interest, but admiration. People could see what time had made of them. A simple couple, full of wisdom, not because of wealth, but by example. As the seasons passed, the cabin changed. The once cracked walls had been reinforced. In the yard, colorful flowers bloomed around the mango tree. Emily cared for the house with the same devotion she had for her husband. She was no longer the girl who mourned what she had lost. She was the woman who understood the value of what she had built. And when she saw her own reflection in the water's surface, it no longer showed sadness, but peace. The beauty she once sought in clothes and ornaments now bloomed in her eyes. Time hadn't erased her. It had revealed her. One afternoon, when the village gathered to give thanks for a good harvest, the old chief called on her to speak. Emily hesitated, but Kobe nodded gently. She stepped onto a small platform and with a firm voice said, "For a long time I thought poverty was shame. But I discovered that shame is living without gratitude. Wealth doesn't live in the hands, it lives in the heart." People looked at each other in silence, some with tears in their eyes. Even Nyasha, hidden among the crowd, lowered her head. On their way home, the sunset bathed the sky in gold. Emily walked beside Kobe, her heart. Halfway down the path, she stopped, looked at him and said, "Do you know what I've learned from you?" He smiled. "What?" She replied that true love doesn't humiliate. It teaches. Kobe didn't answer. He simply held her hand, and they walked in silence back to the cabin, the wind carrying the sweet scent of damp earth. That night, Emily lit the lantern and watched its flickering glow dance on the wall. She thought about everything they had lived. The forced marriage, the people's scorn, the secret revealed, the forgiveness. She understood that suffering had been the fire that refined her soul. Kobe's hidden gold no longer stirred her curiosity. It was the invisible gold, the gold of wisdom and faith that now captivated her. Before falling asleep, she looked at her sleeping husband and whispered, "God didn't punish me by bringing me here. He showed me what love truly is." Outside, the wind rustled the mango tree leaves, and the sound of cicadas marked the end of another day. The village, which once laughed at the couple, now respected them as one respects the sacred. And within that clay cabin, there was something many would never find in palaces of stone: peace, love, and the certainty that true transformation doesn't happen in the world. It happens within the soul. The years passed as the seasons do with their silences, their harvests, and their new beginnings. The clay cabin, once fragile and disregarded, had become a symbol of hope. From afar, one could see the green fields surrounding it, the restored well, and the children running among the trees Kobe had planted with his own hands. Emily, now with a more serene face and strands of gray beginning to show, looked upon it all with gratitude. Every corner of that land held a memory. Every tree was a page from the story they had written together. Covey, even with age weighing on his shoulders, still carried the same spirit. He still rose early, still gave thanks to the earth before touching the soil. But no, he no longer worked just for himself. Over time, the couple began using part of what they had, both the saved money and the fruits of their harvest, to rebuild what the village had lost. The old well, dry for years, was restored by his own hands. The school, once made of broken planks, received new paint, new benches, and books brought from afar. When asked why they did it all, Covey would reply, "Wealth only makes sense when it serves life and dignity." Their generosity began to transform not just the place, but the people. Those who once mocked them now joined in to help. Young people learned to plant. Women gathered to teach, sewing, and elders told stories in the shade of the mango tree. Emily organized the meetings, cared for the children, and taught what she had learned through her own life. It's not shameful to start with nothing. Shame is living without gratitude. Her words were simple, but carried the weight of truth. One morning while watching the school come alive, Emily remembered how she had arrived in that place, crying, bitter, ashamed, and now she saw the same hands that once hid in fear now building, embracing, creating. Fate had come full circle, not with revenge, but with purpose. Covey, watching her from a distance, came close and said with a calm smile, "When two souls meet through suffering and choose love, God writes the rest in peace." She looked at him and replied, "It was love that freed me from shame." That same day, the elders of the village asked the couple to participate in the harvest ceremony. It was tradition for the oldest to tell a life story to the younger ones. Covey stood before them, his face marked by sun and wisdom, and began to speak. "There was a time when people believed wealth lived in the hands. Today, I've learned it lives in the heart. I was called poor and I accepted it because being poor is to lack, but to be miserable is not to love." His words fell over the people like gentle rain. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. When the ceremony ended, many came to thank them. The old chief moved, said, "The field blossoms because there is kindness in the roots, and those roots are here." In these two hearts, Emily took Covey's hand and in silence felt the weight of those words. She knew what they had built went beyond their own lives. It was a legacy that would continue in the hands of those who'd learned by their example, a legacy of faith, of work, and of compassion. Later, at sunset, the couple walked to the top of the hill where they could see the whole village. The sun was slowly saying goodbye, and the sky burned in tones of orange and gold. Covey leaned on his staff and said, "One day, Emily, when time calls me, I want people to remember me, not for the gold I hid, but for the seed I left behind." She smiled and replied, "And I'll say that seed was love." That night, they sat at the doorway of the cabin, listening to the distant sound of children playing. The moon, full and peaceful, bathed the land that now thrived. Emily looked at Covey and noticed the gentle weariness in his eyes, the kind of tiredness that comes to those who have fulfilled their purpose. "You look different," she said. He smiled. "No, I'm just closer to Ossalins." The following days were peaceful. The village blossomed, and their home, though simple, had become the center of a new world. Covey now walked slowly, but his voice still carried strength. In one of their last conversations, he told Emily, "Wealth that is spent runs out, but the wealth that is shared multiplies." And so it was. The man once humiliated for being poor became the foundation of an entire community. The woman who once cried from shame had learned to smile through faith, and together they left the world, the most precious inheritance anyone could leave. The certainty that love, when it is true, can turn even the dust of the earth into eternity. Time passed as the wind passes over ripe fields, carrying away what is old and scattering what must bloom anew. Covey and Emily grew old together without hurry and without vanity. The clay cabin, once a symbol of humiliation, was now remembered with pride throughout the village. There was no luxury there, but there was memory. Every stone in the ground held the sound of laughter, of prayers, of reconciliations born in that home. Over the years, Covey's name became almost a legend. Children grew up hearing stories about the man of the land who chose to be poor to learn the value of life. And when they asked why he had hidden a treasure, the elders would answer, because there are riches that only reveal themselves to the eyes of the heart. Emily would smile upon hearing those words, because deep down she knew they were true. The two lived without display. Even after all they had built, they never left the cabin. Covey would say that moving would be like uprooting a tree. The place where we learn to love is the same where we should rest. Emily agreed, and together they kept the same gentle rhythm, tending the land, welcoming neighbors, sharing stories and bread. There was a kind of peace in them that can't be explained, only felt. But time, which teaches and rewards, also collects its dues. A winter arrived colder than the others. Covey's body began to weaken. Haitian's, once strong, now trembled, and his gaze often seemed distant, as if he were already speaking with the heavens. Emily cared for him with the same tenderness he had once shown her in hard times. She spent her nights keeping watch, praying softly, asking only that God give her a few more days by his side. One early morning, Cobalt called her with a faint voice. "Emily, don't remember the barn." She came closer and nodded. He continued, "The gold is still there, but when I'm gone, I want you to give it all away. Build a new school, a bigger well, and never let the people forget that goodness is the only wealth that matters." Emily wept in silence and promised. Then he smiled the same gentle smile he wore on their wedding day and said, "The greatest treasure I found waits the respect of a woman who learned to see the heart." Those were his last words before falling asleep. Forever, dawn arrived with birdsong and the fragrance of the flowers Kobe had planted. The entire village came to say goodbye. There were no loud cries, no desperate wails, only a deep silence, the kind that exists only when a good soul departs. At the burial, Emily held the old rosary of Aunt Joa, the same one she had carried on her wedding day, and prayed softly. She didn't ask for strength or comfort. She simply gave thanks. "Thank you, Lord, for teaching me what true love is." After Kobe's passing, Emily fulfilled each of his wishes. The hidden gold was used to build a new school, to dig wells, and to help the poorest in the village. And even with his name carved into every wall, she never allowed a statue or any symbol of glory to be erected. "Goodness doesn't need a pedestal," she would say. "It needs continuity." Years went by, and Emily aged peacefully. Each afternoon, she would sit beneath the mango tree, watching the fields bloom. Sometimes when the wind blew stronger, she swore she could hear his voice in the rustling of the leaves. True fortune is to live with honor. In those moments she would smile, close her eyes, and feel her heart warmed as if time, for a brief instant, paused to salute them. When Emily, too, passed away, many years later, the village gathered once more. They buried her beside Kobe beneath the same tree that had witnessed their transformation. The elders say that on full moon nights, the wind that sweeps across the fields changes its tone. And those who listen closely swear they can hear two voices, soft and steady, walking together. His voice, firm and gentle, and hers, sweet and serene, repeating the same lesson that became blessing and destiny. True fortune is to live with honor. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you.